Well, good evening, everyone. We have a few people in tonight. I know I'm coming in a little bit early, but I wanted to just come in a little bit early to talk about the Caboolture Community Action um, group offering that we've been sort of gathering together. It's going to be an offering of food. And we did this last year at Christmas time, and we're looking forward to doing it again. And I just thought I'd let you know that it's behind me here. I'm not stocking up snacks. So this is what we gathered from last week. So pretty good collection of stuff, filling a basket and overflowing. It's about the same amount, maybe a little bit more than we had the week before. And you can see that that has already been boxed away over here. And so we're preparing ourselves for taking it over there. Plan to bring it over after the last Sunday in November. So once we finish the last Sunday service in November, then we'll put everything in the vehicle and make arrangements with them to drop it off with them just in time for December, and I'm sure it will be very much needed. So we're going to keep collecting for next week and for the week following. So you still got a couple of weeks to put items in if you'd like to. They don't have to be expensive items. I got a list here of the non-perishable food suggestions. Now this was made by the Caboolture Community Action themselves. So this is what they find that they always have a shortage on. Obviously, things like tinned baked beans, tinned spaghetti. We have some of those given here. So there's some different soups and things here. Chunky soups or meals, tagged tea bags. So you can get a big box. You can get a box of tea bags if you'd like, and they will put them out into smaller bags to, I'm sure, to distribute. But they said, not to worry about brand names and spending a lot of money on it. They would rather have like a store brand where you could buy more with what you have. That's what they do when they get donations of cash. Also, instant coffee, raw sugar, the heat-treated full cream milks. So the 1 liter size or 2 liter size. We had some of that given this week as well. Instant noodle packets, which we have had given. There's some right there. And again, don't need to be the most expensive name brand. Just get what you can, and the more the better. So they would rather you spend less money on them. And then things for things like school lunchbox fillers for single parent homes where both are out of work and they need to be able to give the kids something to take to school. So things like muesli bars, crackers, cheese, little cheese things, poppers, drink containers that can be taken, fruit cups, things like that. They would appreciate also any kind of cereals, Wheat Bix, any other dry cereals, including oats. I've noticed there's some oats in there too. So I really do appreciate everyone that's giving. You're doing such a great job. And I'm always proud when I take the stuff over there because I know everyone has given toward it. And so it's a real blessing that it's coming from our church, and that everyone really is also interested in making sure that they look after the people of our community. So it's a good deed, and it's a good thing to be involved in. If, as I said before, if you didn't want to bring items like this, some people find it hard to carry things like that. You can donate as a cash offering if you wanted to do that, and we're just finding out how much we've got directed to them over the course of the month, and then we'll we'll go down to the grocery store and buy out as much as we can. So just to let you know, that's ongoing, and I wanted to come on early to tell you that. Let's see who we've got. Well, we've got a lot in now. There's 12 of you. Thanks for hanging in there while I described what's behind me. This is our second lot. So Marlene, good to see you tonight. There's Susan and Colin. Whoa, in Tasmania, no less. I'm glad that you guys could come in with us tonight. It's a long call in. There's Jenny and Sam. Good to see you. Dieter, excellent. Good to see you in tonight. There's Karen, of course, masquerading as myself. And let's see who else. There's Ron and Kathy. Good to see you guys. Let's see who else we have in here. I mentioned Ann and Brian. Ann and Brian are in. Very good. Good to see you guys. Mark and Angela, there they are, and Jacob as well. Glad to hear that Mark's feeling better. He's been back at work this week, so we're looking forward to seeing him on Sunday. Everyone missed him last week, and that is the truth. Not just him, Angela and Jacob as well. We missed everyone. So it's good to see you on tonight. Alicia's here. Great to see you, Alicia. I really appreciate all the hard work that Alicia does. She's really getting the word out, and that's important. It's very important that we do that. Linda's in. Good to see you, Linda. And who else? I think that's it. Might as well mention Helga, because I know Helga's in, and we really appreciate Helga coming in with us into the chat, and she's very faithful to do that. All right. Well, we don't want to waste any more time just dilly-dallying around. Let's get right into the word. We're in Acts chapter 24 tonight, and we're going to cover the whole chapter. We're breaking this down into 4 segments, and just to get through it. But what an interesting time this is for the Apostle Paul. Remember how he came from Caesarea and how he went up to Jerusalem. And then 12 days later, he found himself back in Caesarea. And he and his group of travelers went up to Jerusalem to begin with. But on the return trip, he was accompanied by 200 centurions, 2 centuries of soldiers, 200 spearmen. There were also swordsmen involved. It was a huge gauntlet of people that Lysias, the chief captain, had sent to make sure that Paul got safely to Caesarea, because he wanted to make sure. Now, following that, it's been another 5 days. So since Paul was delivered into the keeping of Felix, we find after 5 days, we take up the reading here in Acts chapter 24, verse 1. So we begin there, and it says, "And after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul." So just imagine what's happened here. Stories are going to be told about what happened. We know what happened in the temple. Paul was in there. He had taken certain men from the church there who had a vow on them, and he was going to go into the temple with them. And he was cleansed. He'd cleansed himself according to their law, and so he was allowed to go into the temple area. And when he was in there, he was seen of Jews from Asia. Remember, this was a great time of feast day, and so the Jews were coming in from all around the area into Jerusalem to celebrate this feast day. And they just happened to recognize the Apostle Paul, and they saw other men with him, and they just assumed that these were the same men that had traveled around with him. And they knew one of the men that traveled, at least one of them, was a Gentile. And so we know that's what caused the ruckus to begin with. But let's listen to Tertullus, a hired hitman of an orator. He's like a solicitor. He's the one that's going to inform the governor against Paul. I like that word. He's just going to inform the governor against Paul. The idea there of inform means to lay out a case. So what is the case against him? And so it says in verse 2, and when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. Now, this may be lawyer speak, but to me, it just sounds like it's flattery. This was a very tenuous relationship. It was a relationship with covered hatred for the Jews. They despised the Romans being in their land. They despised that. They wanted to be in control of everything, but they were allowed to, as long as they could keep control and charge, they were allowed to run their government according to their rules. They weren't allowed to break any Roman rules, however. But it was a very tenuous relationship between the two. And here, Tertullus just seems to be crawling. And so what is he doing? Why would a solicitor do that? Why would he throw out these flatteries when he doesn't obviously mean any of them? They despised the fact that the Romans were over them. They wanted to be free of them. They looked forward to that day when that would happen. That was their idea of a Messiah, that he would deliver them from the Romans, that they would be a nation again, just like they were in days of old. But listen to what Tertullus says. He's seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. Wow, he's almost putting him on too high a pedestal, isn't he? But he says, we accept it always and in all places. Oh, how subservient they are to Felix, the governor of Judea and of this region. And we just want you to know that we don't want to take up any more of your precious time. So I'm going to get right to the chase. In his flattering words, that's what Tertullus was saying. Proverbs has something to say about flattery. Proverbs 29:5. He says, as a man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth, and man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. Now, I know Felix was a smart man. He understood what was involved here, that there was a great deal of jealousy against Paul, great deal of hatred involved. And so I'm sure he was able to see through this flattery. That's a wise man who can see through flattery. A man that flattereth his neighbor is doing nothing more than spreading a net for his feet. So you can bet when flattery gets rolled out over and over again, be careful not to be drawn in by it, because it will be a net for your feet. You'll be caught in the trap. We have an understanding of ourselves. We have a good knowledge of what kind of people we are. We know that we're sinners. If you're a Christian, you're saved by the grace of God. You have his mercy. You walk in that grace. But we know that we have our faults and failings. And so hopefully and thankfully, Felix didn't get caught up in that flattery. Did Paul use flattery? Well, listen to 1 Thessalonians 2:5. He said, "For neither at any time used we flattering words, as ye know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness." So Paul called God to witness to the Thessalonians, saying that we didn't use flattering words. We didn't have a cloak for our covetousness. That is, secretly we were covetous of your goods, the things that you have, and we're trying to cover that up. He says, God is my witness on that fact. But there are interesting things that Tertullus is going to accuse Paul of, and listen to them. Tertullus's accusations against Paul begin in verse 5. He says, "For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law." So there are several things mentioned here. Let's have a look at them. I see 4 in particular. He says, he is a pestilent fellow. You know, that reminds me of the gnat that's constantly buzzing around that you can never quite kill, or the mosquito that you can hear but can never quite get. But in this case, it means he's persistent. So he has been everywhere. He's been all across the regions of Rome. He has been into so many synagogues and in so many cities of the Gentiles, preaching the gospel that they would say, this man is a pestilent fellow. He's a pestilence to us. He's like a disease. That's the idea, the bearing behind the word. He's a disease. So automatically, the terminology is trying to twist the mind of Felix against Paul. So they call him a disease. What else do they call him? Well, he's a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world. Do you think that a Roman judge, as Felix was, would be concerned about sedition? Absolutely. And don't think for one moment that Annas and the elders of the Jews came down from Jerusalem after 5 days because it suited them. I think they spent a good deal of time figuring out, how can we make the most compelling case against Paul? Let's call him a disease. And someone said, let's talk about him as a mover of sedition. Yes, that's a good one, because we know the Romans hate sedition. Their minds will be turned against Paul. So they use that topic as causing sedition. And they'll back this up in just a moment. He says, and also in number 3, a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, this was a bit of an outsider. I think this was, it's further down the list of the things accusing against Paul, because this was something that was mainly understood by the Jews. They had no respect for the people of Nazareth. Remember when Philip was told that they had found the Messiah, and he's from Nazareth. What good thing can come from Nazareth? Check. Even the Jews would say over and over again, check. There's no prophet that comes from Nazareth in the Bible. It's not a place known for producing, great men of God. No, only the Son of God. This was his adopted home anyway. We know that to be a fact. But nevertheless, this term of derision, the Nazarene, something that the Romans would be aware of, that he's a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And combine this with being one who was seditious, trying to overthrow and undermine the kingdom, according to his accusers, and a pestilent fellow as well. He says in his fourth statement here, he says, who also hath gone about to profane the temple. Now, I don't think that would have a great bearing to the Romans, that the temple was going to be profaned, other than this, that anytime there was conflict or a stirring up of the people, it looked bad for the regional heads of the Roman group. It looked bad for even the chief priest and for all of the people who were allowed to continue worshiping, continue conducting their normal business. It looked bad for them. And so they thought, well, if it looked bad for us, it might look bad for Felix. So he'll want to make sure that there's nothing that would stir up the people of the temple to cause this great outrage. And it's really interesting that now Tertullus turns his face away from Paul just for a moment to Lysias, the chief captain, who, by the way, is not present. Lysias had sent, remember, the two legions. He'd sent 200 horsemen. He had sent swordsmen to go with Paul and beasts to put them on. He sent all of these things, but he himself didn't go. Remember how he sat and wrote a letter to Felix and said, this is the reason I'm sending Paul to you. Here are the pieces of background information. And so it's interesting to see. Lysias is not here. Listen what Tertullus says. Tertullus knew that Lysias would not be present because he knew that Lysias was still in Jerusalem. He says, we took him, talking about Paul. We took him and would have judged him according to our law. Because remember, that's what the Romans wanted to be done in all of these cities that were controlled by them. That's why they left people in power, and they were just an overarching power. They wanted everything to continue running smoothly, but they were in charge overall. But they put people in charge who would keep the peace, keep things going on, so the people would continue to have work and food and all of those things. That they wanted those things to continue on. It was in their interest. Just to bring up an example of this, remember in Ephesus, when there was that great upheaval over Diana of the Ephesians, and they brought Jason out and brought him into a Colosseum there. And remember how they were chanting, great is Diana of the Ephesians. For over 4 hours they were chanting, and it was a huge uproar. The city was turned upside down. And you remember how the deputy of that place said, we are in danger of being called into account for the gathering here. This is not a legal gathering. You know, be careful what you do. And he, in essence, dispersed the crowd. You remember how they then grabbed the person who stirred up all of the difficulty, the Jews did, and they beat him because they were actually shamed out of it all. Well, it's the same here, that they don't want upheaval. They don't want troubles and strife to build up, and they don't want a civil war amongst different groups. And so this situation of the Romans over the Jews in Judea and in Jerusalem as well meant that they wanted the peace kept. So Tertullus says, we were going to judge him according to our law. He was in our hands. We had him. And in other words, saying all of this, none of this had to happen. But listen to what he says here. He says, Lysias came upon us and took him with great violence. Let's read it in verse 7. But the chief captain, Lysias, came upon us and with great violence took him away out of our hands. Makes it sound like he was stabbing people and killing them, commanding his accusers to come unto thee by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. So Tertullus laid out his case. He neglected to say, though, that there was a time where Lysias allowed the elders, the chief priest, to sit in judgment of the Apostle Paul. Remember? Don't you remember that? When he allowed Paul to come down and make his defense? And you remember how Paul said, it's because of the resurrection of the dead. And you remember how the Pharisees in that event stood up and said, if he has seen an angel and who has told him to do something, then who are we to fight against God? And the Sadducees, who don't believe in spirits or in resurrection, fought against them, and there was a great division. And so this was the reason, again, Paul had to be taken from their midst, because Lysias was afraid he was going to be torn in pieces, pulled between the two groups until, he lives no more. And also remember, Lysias was in charge of keeping the peace. He wanted there to be peace. He didn't want to be the chief captain over this area and have a debacle on his hands. So twice in the temple and in that meeting, he delivered Paul from the hands of the Jews who were going to tear him apart. But after 5 days, somehow, some way, they had convinced the Pharisees against Paul again, probably deciding that it was in their best interest to be rid of this man, this ringleader, this disease among the people, this stirrer of dissension and contention among the Jews, and this person who desecrated the temple area. And so now they're back in harmony again. And Satan can do that so quickly. He can gather men whose hearts are not turned toward the Lord, people of this world. Their minds can be swayed and moved so easily. We need to be people of discernment. Even God's people must take care and use their mind to understand the word of God, so that we don't get dragged into such things, that we're not tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. But, in this case, the religious leaders, the elders, they were all of one accord, and they assented to the things that Tertullus said. So you see, now they've turned their vitriol against Lysias, the chief captain. And so, believe it or not, because of the use of that name, I think, Paul is delivered yet again by Lysias, not by Lysias himself, but by the Jews using Lysias's name and defiling it, really profaning it before the judge. I don't understand how they thought this would benefit them. But nevertheless, Paul still had his defense to come. So he's seen everything, he's heard everything that's been said about him. And I want you to listen to Paul's opening remarks. And they're located in verse 10 and 11. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, you can just see it. The word beckon means to call with the hand. So you can just see Felix telling Paul to rise and give his defense as the Jews have finished their accusations. So he says, the governor beckoned him to speak and answered, Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand, and that there are yet 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. So what does Paul flatter Felix? Is he saying to him, I really love everything that you've done for our nation, and they may say that they appreciate what you do, but I appreciate it so much more. No. All Paul says is, I know you've been a judge to this nation for many years, and I know that you will understand what I'm about to say. And so I more cheerfully answer for myself before you, because you'll understand. Now, there's no building up of a man. There's no flatteries being laid there. All Paul wanted was an audience. He just wanted to tell the truth. Now, we're going to find out in just a few verses away here that Felix's wife is Drusilla, and she is a Jewess. So this made, of course, Felix eminently qualified to be a governor in this region, with a wife who understood the Jewish nation, and so that would give him a little bit of understanding. So Paul knew that he understood the things about Judaism, probably understood also the ways of the Lord's New Testament church. All right, so we're going to have to move on a little quicker. I'm going to move quickly now, because Paul's explanation is very easy to see. Here's his explanation of events. We're going to start in verse. Let's begin. Yeah, here's the defense against the charges, verse 12. He said, "And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city. Neither can they prove these things whereof they now accuse me. But I confess to thee that after the way which they call heresy, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection, both of the resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. Whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they had aught against me. Or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council. Notice he talks about standing before the council, and they did not find anything wrong with him. They were unable to come to a conclusion, and that's the way it ended. They said, we don't want to fight against God, remember? He says in verse 21, except it be for this one voice, this one word, he said, that I cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, am I called into question by you this day. So Paul just annihilated and completely counterpointed every issue that Tertullus had raised. He says, neither with multitude nor with tumult, purified in the temple. He says, in verse 14, or verse 12 rather, they found me in the temple. They didn't find me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people. That's what they accused him of. Neither in the synagogues nor in the city. So Paul wasn't causing riots. Neither can they prove these things whereof they accuse me. Paul says, my accuser isn't even here. Where Where is the man who accused me of this? That Jew from Asia, where is he? He's not here amongst them. So he's not here to say what happened. So now if these people know, let them say, what evil did they find in me when I stood before the council? And now Felix, whose mind has not been peeled away with the flattery, realizes that there is something up here. Now there's mention of being in front of the council and giving a defense. The Jews mention nothing of this. Instead, they have said that Lysias came with great violence and took them away. So very quickly, of course, Paul also said, because of the resurrection, am I called into question this day? And Felix heard these things, and he has his response. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, it's talking about the way of Christ. So it is called the way in the Bible, Christianity, by many different names. It says, he deferred them and said, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith of Christ. And as he reasoned, this is Paul, he reasoned of righteousness with him, with Felix, and temperance and judgment to come. Felix trembled and answered, go thy way for this time, and when I have convenient season, I will call for thee. He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the oftener, and communed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. Now, Felix is trembling. So what does that mean? Well, it means conviction. It means the man understood what was at stake. There's no mention here that Felix was ever saved. In fact, it shows quite the opposite at the end, that this went on for 2 years. 2 years, Paul was bound in Caesarea. And when I say bound, I mean that he was under the oversight of a centurion. A centurion was charged to keep him, but to give him his freedom, that is to keep him under watch, under guard, but allow people to come and see him, friends to come and see him, family. That was allowed. They were allowed to bring him things and to look after him, to take care of him, basically. So it was a blessing, and all because Lysias never came down. As soon as Lysias can come down, we will hear the utmost of this matter. Lysias never came down. In verse 27, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So he wanted to go out with a good reputation. So he left Paul in that same situation, bound to a centurion with freedom for people to come and go. Now, there's so many things here that we could talk about. We just don't have time. I do want to talk to you about the time, though, that is the time frame. Porcius Festus became governor of this region in 60 AD. Some say late 59, 60 AD, but we'll just use 60 AD. It's probably the most accepted date. So that would mean that Paul was brought down before Felix in 58 AD or thereabouts. So he has spent 2 years here in this semi-prison setting where he's kept bound, not able to go. But he has been a patient and faithful witness in the place that he was. And I just want to close with this tonight. Let's make this personal to us. How can we find anything from this that would help us? Do you ever find yourself in a position where you feel like you don't have the freedom that you once had, or you feel like you're bound? Some people feel this way in jobs. They feel this way in life, that life is, they feel, has dealt them a hand that has kept them down, has held them down into a certain spot. They can't do the things they want to do. They can't go the places they want to go. And if we brood on those things, if we sit and ponder on them hour after hour, we'll become despondent, depressed even. But think about this. Paul was under the oversight of a centurion for 2 years and was not given his freedom. Nothing is mentioned of it other than this little bit that you see here. There's no great things that happen as far as we know, but Paul was faithful where he was in the small things. Don't you reckon we ought to do that? Don't you reckon we ought to be faithful in the small things? I think so. I think we ought, if we're bound, if we're trapped, if we feel that we're ensnared in a spot, then we should understand that if we can't move left or right, forward or back, that perhaps God has placed us there. We'll know perhaps about it, because God works all things together for good to them that love him, to them that are the called according to his purpose. We're called, of course, in Jesus Christ. It's talking there about salvation. So if you're saved, all things are working together for your good. Are you bound to a place or to a job that you really don't like? Then perhaps we should look on it in a different way, that God wants me to be here. God has placed me here for a reason. He's going to work even this together for my good. And how often have we forgotten about these things? The last thing that I would say about this, it's something that I wanted to mention going through it, but let's go back to Paul's defense. I just want to. I know I said I would close with the last one, but I think it's important that we look at this. I'm just going back to see if I can find the verse of scripture here. Here, verse 16. This is a good one for you to write down and look at every morning. And if you want to live a life like the Apostle Paul lived in faith, listen to this verse. Paul describes here his practice of living. He said, and herein do I exercise myself. Exercise means to put in effort. Here I put in effort myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Isn't that the neighbor that you want to have? Isn't that the kind of person that you want to be? I think if we took these two things, being happy in the place where God has obviously given us, placed us for our own good, and to endeavor with all of our being to have a conscience free of offense toward God and toward men. That means when we sin, we confess it to God, who is faithful and just to forgive our sins. When we deal with men, that we deal with them in such a manner as to not be offensive, but rather to always live according to the pattern that we've seen in the scriptures. Paul endeavored every day to exercise. Do I have a conscience free of all offense toward God? Do I have a conscience free of all offense toward men? Mind you, remember, preaching the gospel is an offense to the flesh, but Paul still did that. He was not ashamed of the gospel. Neither should we be. But he's talking here about the way we interact with people. We should make sure that we do everything we can not to offend, not to be offensive. Maybe that's a better way to put it. To be callous and uncaring about others. We should consider others. Well, brethren, I'm glad that you stayed in with us. I'd like to tell you this too. The last Sunday of this month, and this is especially for those who can't come to every service, if you can make it to the last service in November, it would be much appreciated, because we're having the Lord's Supper that day. So I'm trying to see if I can get a calendar up here that will show me the date. That will be the 26th of November. So I wanted to let you guys know the 26th of November, we're having the Lord's Supper, and with, of course, all those who are saved ought to be present, because we have been commanded to observe this supper, to remember the Lord's broken body and shed blood, and to show forth these things until the Lord comes again. So we look forward to that. We look forward to seeing you this Sunday as well. We want you to come anytime you can. Services are at the Morayfield East State School, 10 o'clock in the morning, and again at 5 in the afternoon. We have an afternoon service. Come a little bit early. Come 30 minutes early or so, and have a cup of tea with us. And we'd love to have a chat with you and get to know you. So we have that before the morning and the evening service. So if you can, come along. We'd love to see you. If you've got something to bring, an offering you'd like to bring for the Caboolture Community Action, we'll be happy to take that. And the pile of boxes will continue to grow until that last Sunday in November, and then we'll arrange to take it into them. So until then, God bless you and keep you, and we'll see you on Sunday. How about that? God bless you. Good night.